Okay, Damien, Sudhir, ready for you?
Hello everyone. Let's go through a quick round of introduction. I'm Damien de Chillaz. I'm head of blockchain and B2B platforms for Gemini Business Services. Sudhir.
Hi, Sudhir. I'm Chief Technology Officer for Capgemini Finance.
Adrien Calvayrac, Innovation Ecosystem Lead for the France perimeter, working also as an enterprise architect in the blockchain domain for 3 years now.
So we wanted to start, sharing ideas, insight on blockchain on a topic which we think is extremely relevant to today's pandemic situation. And try to answer the question, can blockchain foster reliable and sustainable supply chains? Obviously, we're going through a massive supply shock right now, demand shock, but also pointing to the limits of supply chain globally, across industries, across regions. It's probably one of the most discussed topics in the war rooms of our corporate customers right now. It was already a strategic priority before the crisis to transform supply chain end to end, addressing operational efficiencies, better managing risk throughout the chain. But we think that today's crisis is actually an opportunity to accelerate some of those pilots or some of those initiatives and essentially catalyze or accelerate this transformation and turn those supply chains across sectors into more reliable and sustainable supply chain and value chain overall. So today's webcast is focusing, is the first of a series of 4. We are going to focus on what blockchain can do as a game changer for supply chains. And the next 3 webcasts will be tackling each of them one dimension of these supply chain pilots that we are seeing very actively across sectors. One is product traceability, the track and trace. You see it very actively in the food sector, in the healthcare industry, among others. Another one will be enhancing transparency and accountability between actors, essentially focusing on supply network maps, which are critical those days. And last but not least is how to automate the procure to pay or the order to cash to accelerate the payment and bring cash visibility into the supply chain, which is very much needed. Clearly, today's situation is pointing to some of the limits of modern supply chains. And it's interesting that a number of pilots on the blockchain side already started addressing some of those limits or pain points. We just wanted to highlight 4 pain points and emphasize the benefit of blockchain very quickly. The first one is the fact that there's a growing recognition of the complexity of the supply chain ecosystems across sectors. And there's definitely a need for supply network maps. There's a very interesting HBR report published recently on the need to better control your supply chain through this kind of map. We think blockchain can be an enabler of that connection and that supply network maps. There's obviously a lack of traceability throughout the supply chain. A number of use cases focus on that, product provenance and avoiding counterfeits. The lack of responsiveness throughout the supply chain is a big pain point. Digitizing, automating, and turning this into straight-through processing by default, we think is key. Blockchain can help on that, especially through smart contract. There's a big lack of visibility. Should it be cash visibility or visibility on the situation of suppliers or on the goods as they transit? A lot of focus on that part on blockchain pilots. Data reconciliation is a major pain point when it comes to procure to pay or order to cash, making sure you can properly, efficiently reconcile the purchase order, the invoices, and the goods received so that you can accelerate the matching, the payment, and the financing. And last but not least, the lack of trust, which is a major pain point throughout the supply chain too. Do I trust my suppliers? Do I trust them deep into the supply chain? And establishing this trust, we think, is one of the promise of blockchain. Next.
Yeah, thank you, Damien. So just a very quick recap on what is blockchain to be sure we are all aligned on that. So blockchain is a distributed database made to store transaction, okay, between different actors, and these transactions are immutable and certified with the same level of validity as if a third party like a bank or a notary was involved in the transaction. There are three main pillars in that. First is the distribution of this database. Second is the encryption and the immutability of all the transactions that we store in this ledger. And this transaction will be validated before being stored in this ledger through a consensus mechanism. That's the three main blocks. And by that, we will enable application around the exchange of value, around tracking and traceability of assets, certification and automation of process. All of that through the connection of a business ecosystem. That's really important. We don't do a blockchain on our own. To bring to this ecosystem transparency, immutability of data, and integrity, and automation of their business processes. There are two main types of blockchain. The public permissionless ledger in the left part. Here we talk about an open ecosystem in which anyone can access and contribute to the ledger. And in this category, we will find all the cryptocurrency that we know, and this database is generally secured through a mining process and incentivized through this cryptocurrency. On the right part, in red, we'll find a completely different type of blockchain, which is the private permission ledger. Here we talk about a closed system where all the participants are trusted by the network. So we cannot allow anyone in the system, and with a lot of functionality to ensure data privacy and confidentiality issues between the different actors. And here, no need for a mining process or cryptocurrency, and no problem to achieve a high transaction throughput. And there we'll find a big enterprise solution like Corda, Fabric, or others. And just one last point around the adoption of blockchain, which have started by the financial sector, of course, but generally the adoption within a company goes through three different stages. The awareness, what is blockchain, what can I do with it? The experimentation with the first proof of concept on one or several use cases, just to really focus on the key use case and the ROI behind that, and start to involve your ecosystem. And the third wave to really transform your business and scale one use case through the whole ecosystem. And still today, we surely have between 70 and 80% of the main organization that are in the wave number 2. Back to you, Sudhir, for the next part. Yeah. Sudhir, can you hear me? I think we have lost Sudhir.
Sorry, guys, I don't know. Let me dial in by phone.
We can hear you quite well now. You can go on.
Is it okay now? Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Just ping me if you're not able to hear me, but I'll continue to speak then. Okay. Sorry about that. So what I was saying is we are definitely in third wave of blockchain, which Adrien said, it's on transformation. Now, last year we debated heavily within Capgemini to say, hey, look, whilst there is so much good thing about blockchain and distributed ledger as technology, why is it not being, adopted globally and at scale? And what can we do as an organization, right? So we took that challenge and we created something called the blockchain puzzle. Now, one of the beauty of blockchain, as you have seen, particularly when it comes to supply chain, and it resonates with the puzzle, is that just by looking at the efficiency of the process itself, blockchain or DLT is going to add to over $1 trillion worth of trade in the next 10 years. So on top of it, you can imagine so many new businesses or the new business models can be created on the foundation. So there's so much potential. So as an enterprise, how can we help DLT to scale? So we use this puzzle, as you can see on the left side. So it primarily around use cases, like in blockchain for supply chain, we talked about what are the predominant use cases, manufacturing, like supplier contract, or if it is CPR, it's more of a provenance, or if it is retail, it's more of counterfeit management. What are the predominant use cases and why they are predominant, and what is the efficiency that they are going to get? We also looked at platforms, which briefly touched by Adrien as well, on public versus private, type of consensus, uh, and so on and so forth. But there are a couple of areas which I want to call it out clearly. The first is, consortia. So blockchain or DLT is a consortia-led business and technology approach, which means you have inter-organization, multiple organizations coming together and solving certain problem. And that is one of the biggest difficulty in having multiple organization to agree certain things throughout the supply chain. And that may be one of the reason why it is not scaled as much as we have thought over the last 8 to 10 years. The second key thing which we also saw was about the bucket about regulation and particularly standardization, adoption, interoperability with other technologies, right? Cost of onboarding, etc. So there are so many other levers that we looked at. Why we are saying this? We are saying this because we as a company, we are able to resolve these problems, then we better off being increasing the adoption of supply chain areas and use cases. So that is our commitment, and that's why I thought I will highlight it with you. A couple of fascinating use cases, because Damien touched upon COVID situation to start with, right? So the supply chain in DLT, some of the examples are so fascinating that for example, there is a company which we have partnered recently about UNICEF, who works for UNICEF, and it talks about probably about 3 billion doses of medicine, and it supplies to about 100 odd countries. And it's so disappointing to see that 80 out of 80% of the cost that they spend on supply chain, most of them will go waste, because the medicine, when it finally reaches the destination and the children, it is of no use, because it was not tracked in the way it has to be tracked. So bringing cross technology like IoT in this case along with DLT is a great example to not only solve the economic problem, but also being part of the social needs, data needs that the world require at this stage. So to summarize, this enormous potential of blockchain in supply chain, be it manufacturing, retail, or CPR. We should look at blockchain puzzle components because there are some puzzles which are not as mature as the others, which is where we have the opportunity to work through. And our final goal is to make sure that DLT becomes a scalable transformation programs of work, and we contribute to the inclusiveness and the social impact to the new world. Over to you, Adrien. Probably skip I've summarized the last. Keep going. Keep going. One more. One more. Yeah, just a pause here to say that there is a blockchain in supply chain which is Capgemini paper, which is available for you. The top three reasons during the survey came out as cost, traceability, and transparency as the three main reasons for most of the companies to implement supply chain based blockchain solution. So these are the drivers which we should be aware of, because these drivers will give us use cases per industry. If you go to the previous slide, and the deck will be with you, it talks about more use cases in each area: manufacturing, consumer products, retail, and also nicely shows the graph of because end of the day, it is about adoption. So what constitutes higher adoption and what constitutes higher complexity? As I gave an example, regulatory compliance, it's extremely complex sort of area. Whereas if you look at tracking provenance, will have higher adoption because it is solving the major supply chain issue with a moderate type of complexity. So that's the sort of summary on building on what Damien said. And back to you, Adrien.
Thank you, Sudhir. And just to on the other side of the of all the key benefits and levers to implement blockchain, among the blockchain projects that have been launched around supply chain, some challenges have been encountered of different nature, of course. But here, if you look at the figure on the left, that comes from this this survey we conducted 2 years ago over 500 supply chain organizations. The key takeaway here is that the ROI is clearly the main issue. We have seen so many blockchain projects over the last 3 years supported more by a buzz effect than by a clear business case. And the ROI question has definitely to be addressed at the very beginning of the project to guarantee its success. In addition to the other challenge that you can see here on the left, which are still there, but maybe in a less extent, thanks to company and technology increased maturity over the last 2 years. I just wanted to highlight in the blue square some other we found along project, and especially the difficulties to onboard the whole ecosystem around the use case and not only one very close partner, and especially also the non-digitized actors that are often correspond to the first mile of your supply chain that don't have any IT system as of now. So that's an important part. Also is the challenge to set up the blockchain solution governance, both in the business part and in the technical part, to gather all the different actors on the same table. And finally, the link between the physical and the digital assets associated with all the trade-off we generally have to make between the level of guarantee you want and the cost of the tracking solution that range from RFID to the most evolved sensors, but versus the asset cost. So a lot of IoT and blockchain problematics here also. Okay, and now let's see with Damien what are the component of a successful blockchain program here.
This is our experience so far, and I think we share it in the market that it's a challenging journey. It's very collaborative, as we said. You have to embark a number of stakeholders to select the right use case, make it clear what the value is expected out of it, the ROI, etc. But if anything, we thought there could be 6 steps or 6 streams that should be considered once you've found the use case, define it properly, and consider it to turn it into a pilot and then scale. The first thing, obviously, is to avoid the syndrome of a solution looking for a problem. We are not here to push a blockchain whatsoever into and at any cost into the supply chain. There are many pain points in the supply chain which can be addressed with automation, central database, etc., which do not require blockchain. So one of the key questions is, do you really need a blockchain architecture? And then right after that is, what is the right framework or platform? You know about Hyperledger Fabric, you know about R3 Corda, Ethereum. What is the right protocol for your use case, and not vice versa? The second point is probably to assess in your company, your organizational readiness. Who should be sponsor of this pilot? Probably the innovation team somewhere, probably with a business lead as well, or some of those CPOs, procurement officer or supply chain officer, typically collaborating with finance and accounting in the supply chain. So who are your stakeholder, and how ready is the organization to support and sponsor the pilot? It has to be meaningful, so it has to bring value, especially those days. It has to be short-term gains, operational efficiency typically. We definitely recommend to tie it to some of the top strategic priorities of the group so that it gets the right attention, the right sponsoring, because it's a pretty long journey with different milestones, and it's important to celebrate success down the road and get pretty early on some return on investments, on some operational efficiency typically, and risk mitigation benefits. Point number 4 is defining the KPIs, the measures of success that will be measured by your sponsors down the road on a quarterly basis, typically, at every stage of live and scale, so that you can essentially have a go, no-go at every step and justify further investment if needed. Point number 5, obviously, is about security. IT system control, data sharing is a critical part of your business, especially on sensitive information. So making sure the solution implemented properly interconnect with your system and offers the right degree of security, cyber security is key. There's a testing there at some point. The whole design has to be thought through to guarantee those kind of best practices from a cybersecurity standpoint. And last but not least, the governance strategy is how your network, your platform, or the use case that you are working on, which would lead to a network or a platform, how is it governed? Who decides? Who gets in? Who gets out? If it's a consortium, which is some of the use case, how is it governed? There may be some first founders, there may be some new members. It has to be sufficiently open if you want to reach a good network effect, the goal to create value for the whole ecosystem. So what is the governance strategy? It ties to the business model as well. What's the business model? What's in for each stakeholder? It's typically a multi-stakeholder exercise or project. So next, the end of this webcast, which was a very generic webcast, but we wanted to position the blockchain discussion here. Definitely in the context of supply chain. Definitely blockchain is moving to production. We see it across sectors very actively in the food, the energy, the automotive industry, the healthcare, life science. So definitely entering production. It is very disruptive in the supply chain. It has the potential to really transform or help catalyze the transformation of supply chains. As an enabler, not the only technology and not the only driver, but it's a great enabler of this transformation. And ultimately, we believe it could lead to more efficient, definitely, operational efficiencies, avoiding redundancies, manual tasks, bringing some form of straight-through processing through the chain, helping the digitization of processes where they are still very manual. Reliability is key, obviously. We see it those days. Sustainability, Sudhir was mentioning the social impact, the environmental impact as well. Supply chain, in the supply chain lies a lot of sustainability goals and commitment, especially on climate change. So getting more a better control over your suppliers, getting more the right information from them, and potentially incentivizing them to act more sustainably through sustainable supply chain financing, typically, we think could be one of the drivers of some of those projects. So next week, we'll we start deep diving into the next gen product traceability, the track and trace dimension, those blockchain pilots, followed by transparency and accountability and automation of procure to pay. Sudhir mentioned that the Research Institute has published a document which may be of interest to you on blockchain and supply chain, which is a very comprehensive one. And you may know that we are also very active in two academic share on blockchain. One is the Polytechnic share, and another one is with the Australian Swinburne University. That's a way for us to work on the academic and research part of blockchain as well. There's a lot of research going on there, and we want to be active and draw a link between research, fundamental research, and applied innovation for our clients. So thank you. Thank you all to for your attendance of this first webcast. We hope you found it interesting. We encourage you to read. There's a lot of papers issued right now on blockchain and supply chain. We definitely want to take our part of and responsibility in this thought leadership. Now we welcome your questions, if any.
Thank you, Damien. Yeah, you have a Q&A panel, so don't hesitate to put your question. We are still there for a few minutes, so don't hesitate to share your questions. And yes, to answer many of these questions, we will share in a few days the deck, the slide deck, plus the recording of this session. Can you please give example of project with blockchain on Capgemini? I can share a few. I'm sure Damien and Sudhir will also have ones. I can share some example in the supply chain. For example, one project we have with Dockers, the port facilities, to ensure the full traceability of the dangerous resources such as nuclear waste or other thing like that, transportation from one country to another, taking advantage of all the blockchain network to be able to secure each part of the transportation process between the different actors. That is one. Another one, and this is called safety log, yeah, of course. Another one in another context for the defense department of one European country plus some NGOs around creating a secure messaging network for fighting areas or disaster areas, which is also ongoing. I don't know if you can share some others on other context, maybe, Damien?
Yes, yeah. I mean,
Sudhir?
Damien, I'm sure have more as well. There are plenty of case studies, and as you know, there's a case study on spare parts tracking. There's a case study on pharmacy efficacy management. There's a case study on the lobster supply chain management. There are plenty.
Especially those days, we think two areas are really worth focusing on across industry, and that's where we developed some assets, including the ones we call Blue Catalyst, which is developed on R3 Corda. One clear use case is the need I touched upon is the need to properly map your supplier network and have a clear view on who your suppliers are deep into the supply chain, collecting information from them. We call it the Know Your Supplier, KYS, which is pretty close to the process we see in the banking side on Know Your Customer, KYC. So that's, we think, a big area. It is for us a big area of focus because we think it's applicable across industries and very include blockchain. There you typically want to use the latest technology to map a complex ecosystem visually and be able to drill down into some kind of graph data organization. So that's typically one area, call it procurement, onboarding, sourcing. There's another one which I mentioned as well, which is a source of a lot of inefficiency. It's the procure to pay, reconciliation between purchase order invoice and goods received, and that applies across industries. And those days with the need for cash visibility and efficiency in payments, that's, we think, a very critical module. Plus, there's a notion of a very large amount of use case on the track and trace, provenance, can be very specific to goods or services.
Any more questions? Okay, so if there is no any more question, I propose to stop there. Thanks a lot to all the attendees for being there. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Sudhir. And hope to see you in 1 week for the focus around traceability use case.
Thanks so much, Adrien, Damien. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Be safe and keep it up. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye now.